Welcome back. We're going to talk about population pyramids. Population pyramids are a visual way to kind of represent the topics, the theories that we've been talking about. So, what you're seeing right here is a population pyramid for the United States of America. What year is this? For 2019. So, that's our total population. What this does is it breaks it down by age and sex. So, in 2019, right, people who were 0 to 4 years old, 0 to 4, of the population that was male, that was 3% of our total population. And then girls, 2.9. So you add it together, so roughly 6% of our total population were 0 to 4. And every line here is an age group. So 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, all the way up here to the very top. The bigger the line, the bigger the part of the population. And you can kind of see it's almost the same for men and women, a little different here and there. But what do you notice here? You notice that we have kind of a bulge right here between those are 25 and 29. Kind of a bulge right here. And this varies. Let's pick another country. Let's pick, how about Uganda? Uganda in Africa. Look at that pattern. Much different. And what do we notice? I'm going to go back and forth. Look at the base of the pyramid versus the top. So here's the base in Uganda. And look at the United States. Right? What do we notice? There's a lot more younger people and a lot less older people as a percentage of the population. This would indicate that they are in the early stages of the demographic transition. High birth rates, lots of young people, but less older people, high death rates. Look at the United States. Compared as a whole, it's pretty much the same. So in other words, there's not a lot of people being born, but there's not a lot of people dying, right? So the population pyramid can tell you a lot of things. Let me go here to the PowerPoint. Different countries. Here's Uganda, right? Here's Guatemala. Notice how it's kind of stepped. So now you're starting to see, fewer children. So they're kind of moving through that. India. Here's Japan. Japan's kind of the opposite of Uganda, isn't it? They have huge parts of the population that are in their 60s and 70s and very low amounts of children. So the population pyramid kind of lets you explore some of these concepts visually. Now, the demographic dividend, we talked about that, right? You have this large bulge. Let me go back right here. So Guatemala, the people that are, 24 right here through 45, a large chunk of the population right here, and a very small part right here. So you have more workers than people who need support, retirees. You do have a lot of children, right? In Japan, you have a large amount of people here in their 50s and 60s still working. So the demographic dividend says this. That would give you more opportunity. Now, to get the full dividend, you need both sexes to be involved. In the United States, a lot of these industrialized countries like we are, to use that, everybody has to work. Some countries, that doesn't happen. Look at the percentage of women in the labor force. This just tells you by country how many women have a job outside the home. And you'll notice that the countries that are the wealthiest are pretty high in the score. The countries that are the poorest are very high in the score. And that's because in some countries you not only need to work at home, but maybe at a small job on the side. But look at this. Below 35, very low participation. And this right here, mainly for cultural reasons. This is the Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. In these countries, Pakistan is the largest by population Islamic country. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, many of these countries. In Saudi Arabia, women only gained the right to have driver's licenses a few years ago. In many of these cultures, women are not allowed outside of the home unless they're with a male relative to be escorted around. So that makes it very difficult to work in a job, doesn't it? So we see that these affect countries in various ways. One of the aspects of the demographic transition is if you have more workers, if you have more people looking for work, you can pay less money, can't you? So McDonald's pays so low because if you don't like the work, then fine, I'll find someone else who does. There are enough people who want the job. Lewis Turning Point says that's great, but at a certain point, you're going to max out on cheap labor. So you can only go so high. Because if your economy grows to the point where everybody has a job, well, first of all, that means your economy is just going crazy. But then that means there is no more cheap labor. Everyone is employed. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It'll end up in itself. Let's look at the demographic dividend through two countries, through two lenses. The first one is Brazil. So Brazil grows from 1872 to currently, it basically 200% population growth from 10 to 200 million. So that was them going through the demographic transition. Very rapid growth of population is now leveled off. And that begins in the 1970s. In the 1970s, we start seeing more family planning. The country has become much more urban. People are living in the cities. There's a lower role or a lessened rate for church that encourages large families. And so we see populations shrink. But what happened since the 70s is Brazil was once one of the world's poorest countries, is now one of its economic powers. In your lifetime, Brazil might become one of the third or fourth biggest economy in the world. And that is a huge switch in their role because of that demographic dividend. They have less retirees, but more working people to care for. So we've seen that. We've seen an increase, but we've also seen social welfare programs, democratization. People want more role in their government. They need more help with issues like childcare because there's more kids to be cared for. And the one thing we're starting to see now is Brazil has entered that stage where the population is beginning to age. The average age is getting older. And what that means is there are effects that happen with that. We'll talk about that towards the end of the chapter. Another aspect of this that is negative is the youth bulge. If your country goes through the demographic transition and all of a sudden you have a large number of young people, especially 15 to 24, and this usually happens, again, when we see that reduction in the death rate, but the birth rate hasn't dropped. We often see a lot of conflict. A great example is the Arab Spring. In 2010 through 2012, you see revolutions in Egypt, in Qatar, Libya, Syria. And what we think happened is this. You have this large group of young people, but those countries did not have the economic growth that other countries had. So you have a large number of people, but limited opportunity for them. In Tunisia, there was a revolution. And one of the things that sparked it was this young male who basically, as a protest, lit himself on fire. And people want to protest this. Why did he do this? He was a street vendor. The only way he could earn a living was selling fruit in the street. But there was so much competition for that, and so much government corruption that he got his fruit cart stolen, taken away. He went to protest to the government. There was no help. And he said, I'm never going to be able to be more than a fruit vendor, and you're taking this away. He felt powerless. So much so that he protested by basically killing himself for his belief. But this ignited a spark among those of the younger age who saw no future for themselves in this country. Basically, they were all these young people with nothing, nowhere to go, nothing to do, no school, no opportunities. Okay? And this happened repeatedly in there. This ties into the Easterlin hypothesis. This is a theory that says that the size of your cohort, a cohort is a group of people that you are in. So if you were born between, 1995 and 2005, that's your cohort, right? People who are basically within 10 years of your birth rate. And the effects of that depend on that. Here's an example. In 1945, there were more children born in that year than any other year in American history. World War II had just ended. All the soldiers came home. And for the next 20 years, the population of the country in the United States skyrockets. They call that the baby boom. So if you were born between 1945 and 1960, there were many, many other people your age, a lot more compared to society. That slows down. I was born in the 70s, and the years I were born, there were fewer people born at any other time than the last 50 years. So there were less people my age in society, which when I graduated high school meant that people who were entering the workforce, there was less competition, right? Conversely, though, population grew again afterwards. So one thing that happened was, in the 1990s, we actually see crime decrease. And one of the things we think about is there was actually just because there were less crime is usually committed by young people. younger people. And if there's less younger people because the population of young people has fallen, then there's less crime. Conversely, there should have been more opportunity, and in some ways there were. In some ways there's not. The last phase, I'm going to stop right here. It's been 10 minutes, and then we'll finish up this chapter in the next section.